Okay, so this is clip 7 on my discussion about inflation. So let's just finish up the debt monetization stuff. So that's basically what it boils down to, is when if governments get stuck, and apparently this seems to be sort of a common theme that they found. So it's not just the Germans; it's also the other ones like Hungary and so on. That the thing that kicks all of this off is a large deficit, and the government cannot plug the hole by raising taxes or borrowing from other people or cutting expenditures maybe, and so they start printing money. And when you start doing that, then that ultimately leads to the inflation. And the high inflation, of course, is the hyperinflation. And of course, what this ends up doing is it destroys the functions of money, right? The money that currently exists basically is no longer playing its functions. It's no longer a medium of exchange because people don't want it, because they're afraid that if they take it, it's going to be worthless. Or going to soon become worthless. So it's like it's like a hot potato. No one wants to hold on to it. That's basically what it means when money loses its function as a medium of exchange. And this is because, of course, it loses its purchasing power in real terms, right? So it doesn't buy as much stuff, like the German example there, when 6 billion marks was all the money in the whole country, and then 10 years later it barely bought a loaf of bread. So the money doesn't buy as much, and that of course is the loss of that store of value function. And so basically what ends up happening is your money ultimately gets destroyed. Okay, and it's like game over. Okay, so that I think is very important, because it also brings in the central bank. See, because if the central bank is partly guilty, because they're the ones who are buying the bonds the government creates, these IOUs, and creating the new money. Of course, they're sort of not completely guilty, because of course usually the government forces them to do this, right? And this is part of the reason why, if you ever look more into central banking, one of the important issues is central bank independence. You see, in this scenario, for this to happen, the central bank and the government have to sort of be working together, you see. But if you can separate the central bank and keep the politicians out of it, the central bank might be able to say, no, there's no way we're going to do this, and prevent this hyperinflationary scenario from developing. So that's just a very quick and dirty sort of introduction to what they call central bank independence. It's an important topic as well. Okay, so that is basically that. I think that's all I wanted to cover. Let me just quickly check my notes here to see if I define. Let's see, did I do everything I want to talk about? Talked about that. Defined all the terms. Yeah, so I think I covered pretty much everything. So I think so. Let me just make sure. I got about 9 pages of stuff here to look at. That's pretty much it. So now I guess I can go on to the last thing I wanted to touch upon, which was sort of, I actually found this on Wikipedia, and maybe not the best of academic sources, but I read it. It's okay. What they said is not completely bad. It's fine. And they talked about government manipulation. When high inflation starts happening, what do governments normally do? How do they react? Kind of like a behavior kind of question. And these are some of the things that they mentioned as potential signs that the government is lying to you about how bad inflation really is. Let's see. The first one could be lying in official statistics. Could lie about things like money supply or inflation rates. Okay, or the amount of reserves that are being held at the central bank, right? Those are the deposits of of commercial banks that are held at the central bank. Okay? Another thing could be suppression of publication of money supply statistics or inflation indices. Governments could try to bring in things like price and wage controls. Okay? Or they could try to force people to save money, right? Because there's too much money floating around. So try to force everyone into some sort of, savings program. Or governments could try adjusting the components of the CPI, how they measure these statistics, right? They could, and in particular, removing items whose prices are rising the fastest. So in other words, they're the ones who are causing a lot of the upward pressure. So we remove them from the index, and look, everything looks fine. Of course, it's all phony. It's playing with the numbers, and I mean, I'm not an expert in, United States central banking, but you watch the news and the financial news, and that's a good thing to do. Tons of it available. I mean, it's not hard to find. It's all over the place. But if you listen to the reports that come out of the United States, there's a lot of red flags. One of them being, like, for instance, the Federal Reserve would print money supply statistics. And there are different measures like M1, M2, and M3. Your textbook, mentions M1 in chapter 18. I think it vaguely mentions M2. And no one seems to mention M3 anymore, which is the broadest measure of money. And the Fed stopped publishing it. And that's sort of like this one warning sign is when you start seeing suppression of publication of money supply statistics. Gets you thinking, well, why would they stop doing that? Is it because they're trying to hide the fact that the money supply M3 is growing very rapidly, which is suggestive of high inflation? Right? They don't want everyone to panic and oh, 1 second, got stuff popping up here on my computer. So that's part of it. Another thing, of course, as like we just learned from the debt monetization issue, is that when governments get large deficits, they might turn to money creation. And this is actually what's really going on in the United States. I mean, they have, I believe, a $9 trillion debt, and they just added on, I think, like trillions more because the government is basically propping up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So it's, in effect, the amount of debt, of the federal government pretty much has just ballooned up by trillions of dollars. Of course, then when all the old people start retiring, you start having more entitlement programs as well. So there's more potential problems with more borrowing needed. So if there ever comes a point where they can't keep financing this, keep borrowing, if the United States can't keep borrowing from other countries, because that's basically what it's doing, and it has no choice, then it might set up this kind of scenario in which they have to start just printing more money, running the printing presses, and then that, of course, becomes very inflationary and very dangerous. That's why you'll also hear that precious metals like gold and silver have sort of come back in style, back in vogue, so to speak, because they are historically known as a good store of value. And so that's why demand for gold is up. And gold prices are up quite a bit, actually, from before. They're almost, around $1,000 an ounce seems to be the target, I think, that most people are expecting. Anyway, so keep watching it. There's also some other issues about, like core inflation, where they measure inflation but exclude things like food and oil and so on. Can be somewhat controversial as well, because those are important things that people need and are the main things that are jacking up prices right now, is food prices and gas prices. Anyways, I'm out of time. That's all on consumer price index and inflation.